This episode of How I Built It is brought to you by two great sponsors. The first is our season-long sponsor. Liquid Web has been best known as a managed hosting company with tons of options. It's also designed a managed WordPress offering that is perfect for mission-critical sites. If you're looking for improved performance, maximized uptimes, and incredible support, Liquid Web is the partner you've been looking for. Every Liquid Web managed WordPress customer has iTheme Sync integrated into their managed portal, allowing them to update several sites with a single touch. Liquid Web hosts all of my critical websites, and I couldn't be happier with them. If you sign up today, using the discount code HowIBuiltIt33, you get 33% off for the next 6 months. Visit buildpodcast.net/liquid to get started. That's buildpodcast.net/liquid. It's also brought to you by Seriously Simple Podcasting. Seriously Simple Podcasting lets you manage your podcast feed and content right inside WordPress. With the introduction of Seriously Simple Hosting, now you can host your podcast media files on a dedicated hosting platform that is completely integrated with your WordPress site. So publishing your next podcast is just as easy as creating a new post, uploading your file, and clicking publish. With our Edit As You Upload feature, there's no need to wait around for your file to upload to finish writing your episode's show notes. They give you full control of the post editor while your podcast file is uploading to their servers. And How I Built It listeners can use the promo code BUILTIT for your first month completely free. And if you're moving from another hosting provider or have been self-hosting your media files, they offer a complete concierge migration for all your episodes to Seriously Simple Hosting. I've been playing around with Seriously Simple Podcasting for the last couple weeks, and I've got to say, I'm really impressed. As somebody who uses WordPress with podcast hosting, I think it's a great one-stop shopping tool for your podcast needs. So go ahead and visit buildpodcast.net/podcasting to sign up today. And remember to use the code BUILTIT, that's BUILTIT, for your first month completely free. Now this week we have a very special guest, Mike Rohde of Sketchnotes fame, and we're going to be talking to him about how he came up with the Sketchnotes idea, his Sketchnotes Army, and much more. I'm very excited to have him as the 50th guest on this podcast. So thanks so much for joining me. Definitely stick around. It's an absolutely great conversation. And without further ado, on with the show. Hey, everybody. Welcome to another episode of How I Built It, the podcast that asks, how did you build that? Today, my guest is the leader of the Sketchnotes Army, Mike Rohde. How are you, Mike?
I'm doing good, Joe. Thanks for having me on. This is really fun.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for being on the show. I'm really stoked that we can get you on here. I'm glad that you're on the show because you're different from a lot of my other guests for a few reasons. First of all, Sketchnotes is a very analog thing. Most of the time we talk about things in the digital space on this show. But also, you and I are both published by the same book publisher, so which I think is a first for this show. So I'd love to talk a little bit about that as well. But first, why don't you tell us who you are, what you do, and how you came up with the idea for Sketchnotes?
Sure. So I'm Mike Rohde. I live in Milwaukee, and I am a designer. I've been a designer for many years. Actually started my career in print design pre-internet. So I've got the perspective of coming into the internet when it was a new, weird thing that nobody understood. And I was very fascinated by it. In many cases, other people were not, but I sort of dove headlong into it, and it became a big part of my life. So the second part of my career, I spent as a web designer. So I did some of the early web stuff, did coding. Then I got to the point where I realized there were far better coders than me. And then I focused on the design and hired really good people. And then once I moved through that process, the third act that I've been in is user experience design. So I think I've actually always had the perspective of how things work and how to make them simple and work easily. So it was a natural fit when I had an opportunity to join a firm here in Milwaukee that focuses on human-centered or user experience design. And I've been doing that for about 7 years now, currently contracting at a large insurance company and providing user experience and design services to software teams. So I work with lots of developers And that could be an interesting angle that we can take specifically on applying sketchnoting. But then finally, as far as sketchnoting is, I like to call it Notes Plus. So it's this idea that you take the notes you're writing already and you simply add visuals to them, and then you sort of process through the filter of what are the big ideas or what are the important things that I can take value from. You focus on those and you capture those, and everything else you let it go, because obviously you're not going to apply those to your life. So why record the things that you don't care about? So that's really the core of it. It's a visual thinking approach to taking notes, and it sort of got started when I was actually a really fantastic note taker, but I hated it because I was in the opposite mode where I recorded everything, and then I had to parse through all this stuff that I wrote and try and figure out what was valuable. And that's where I really realized, like, why am I recording everything and then forcing myself to process it all again? Why don't I just process it all in the moment, do the analysis in the moment, and just take the things that I think are valuable then? And once I did that, I suddenly found all this free time, in a sense, to visualize it. And that's where my design background came in, to start using drawings and typography and things to make my notes more interesting. And it was a way for me to solve a painful problem. And I thought, hey, there's probably other people like me out there, so maybe I should share this idea. So that's where it led to building a community, doing lots of sharing, and eventually getting an opportunity to write a book, and then another book about the approach to sketchnoting, so that other people could adopt the idea.
Nice. Yeah, so that's awesome for a few reasons, because you do have the kind of technical background of other guests that have been on the show. And then we talk about, everybody probably who listens to this show has gone to a conference, has seen a talk, has sat in a classroom where you spend time writing down everything that the person's saying, and then you're not really listening, right? You don't really get what they're saying because you're too busy writing it down. But with the sketch notes, you're hearing it, you're writing down the important stuff. So I'm sure it probably has some effect on your retention rate as well. Would you argue that?
Yes, I think it certainly does. And I think a lot of the reason why, there was some actually recent research that was done. If you want to look up the research, the people who conducted it are someone named Mueller and Oppenheimer. And basically, in a nutshell, the test they did is they pitted longhand note takers versus typists. And they played like a TED Talk or something like that and said, we want you to record the things that are most valuable from the talk, and then we're going to test you. So they set them loose. They had two groups, the one that was longhand, one that was typists, and they watched the video and took notes. Immediately afterwards, both groups did fine. It was so fresh in their memory, it sort of didn't matter. But when they came back and tested them at a later time, I think it was maybe a week later, the keyboardists' memory retention had dropped significantly compared to the longhand writers, and they were kind of confused or just kind of surprised by that. They thought maybe having that much more speed typing, it would be better better retention, but it actually didn't work out that way. And what they realized was the longhand note takers were actually doing analysis, because they came to the point where they realized there's no way that I can handwrite verbatim notes that this person is saying. I have to make some decisions about what are the concepts, right? You had to sort of do some formation in their heads and using their hand to write. And so what they did is they ran the test again, because they felt like, well, if we tell the keyboardists that they shouldn't take verbatim notes, maybe then, the quality of their retention would be the same. And so they told them that in the second run, and the keyboardists just fell right back into typing verbatim notes again, and it really didn't make a difference. So it was kind of an interesting bit of research that suggests analysis is a big part of the value of note taking, and the retention the memories that you're making are all part of that analysis that's happening in the moment. Whether in this case, they weren't drawing anything, they're simply writing longhand. But I think the other thing they sort of seemed to discover was using your hand to do the writing as opposed to keyboarding was a little bit more connected. So the whole body movement and brain, and so the kinesthetic aspect of it seemed to be more significant with longhand writing. And I imagine sketchnoting would be the same way. And it really focuses your mind in a different way about listening, right? So if you're listening simply to record what's being said, it's almost like passing through your mind. You're not really capturing anything. Mm-hmm. Or if you're doing analysis, you have to listen, right, to make sense of it and to sort of piece it together and make it logically make sense to you, or to call out the things that don't make sense if you feel like that person is, not saying that something that makes sense, so you can later research it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, that makes perfect sense. And especially, if somebody's using their own laptop, there's also like the distraction factor,
Sure,
right?
sure.
So that's very cool. I was fortunate enough to be included in your second Sketchnotes book, sketchnoting. I believe it was a Yankee Mets game. I remember because
Yep,
I drew the little subway train, the subway series.
exactly, yeah.
So, but we'll dive into that a bit more later because it is a fun topic. So let's talk about, now that we have a background on sketchnotes, what was the research process like for deciding to write the book and then ultimately getting the book accepted by Peach Pit?
So actually, I was really fortunate that I had a fellow author who made an introduction for me. So there's a guy named Von Glitchka. You can look him up. He lives out in Oregon. He's an amazing illustrator, and he became fascinated with sketchnotes, and we became friends. And when I went to Portland for another event, we had dinner together. And over dinner, he said, "Mike, you've got to write a book about the sketchnoting stuff." I said, "But I'm writing blog posts, and I'm getting all this attention. Like, it's not. You need to write a book." I was like, "Okay." And he said, "I know the person who you need to talk to," and he introduced me to his editor later that evening. So that was certainly a big part of getting attention. A lot of times it's just hard to get people to be open to your idea, but I think what you do find is people that do acquisitions, they'll call themselves acquisition editors, are always looking for really interesting ideas, different angles on things that haven't been covered. And that's, part of the whole book process is how do you do something unique that also is still relevant and in context to other things, right? If it's too far out there, you may not have any audience, but if it's too much like everything else, then it's like, why bother making another book? So you got to find that interesting balance between the two. So he made that introduction. I think that was a big part of it.
Nice, yeah, and with book writing especially, because I'm sure I don't have any numbers to back this up, so this is just anecdotal, but I imagine it's a lot harder to justify the value of writing and printing books now. Because there's ebooks, there's video courses, and things like that. I'd love to do a follow up, a version 2 of my book, Responsive Design with WordPress, which, to your point, was about timing. There was not a book like that already, and it was 2 fairly popular topics. But I don't know if the bandwidth is there for the publisher to be able to do that now, or to justify doing that now.
I think it's a much more challenging environment than when we wrote our books. My first book was 2012, so that seems like eons ago. That's like 5 years ago now.
Yeah.
And
which is like 100 in internet years.
Exactly. And then the second was 2014, which is 3 years ago, which is still like forever ago in those terms. And I think in that short time, I think there's still a place for books, but I think it's a much more niche place in some ways. And I almost think a lot of ways video has sort of taken a big chunk of that. I think the challenge, and the reason why I haven't really focused on doing a course or anything on sketchnoting, is I just don't know if the formula is quite right yet. I see lots of courses out there, and it helps some people, but I know like Seth Godin did some research on the courses he did, and I mean, he's Seth Godin, right? He should have 90% completion rates, and he was getting like really tiny completion rates, like 5% or something outrageously low, and he was just dissatisfied with it, and that's what pushed him to do something he calls the alt MBA, which was a much more he said, I think his concept of the problem with video courses is generally that there's really no accountability, right? You can sign up for a million courses and just never, you watch a couple episodes and never finish them, and there's no impetus to really do it because there's no one really, there's no one waiting for you in the room that you're going to, like in a typical classroom, and there's just not a lot of accountability. So he structured the alt MBA in different ways by, building in accountability. He's got smaller groups. He charges a pretty fairly high price. I think it's like $3,000 or something like that. So it's much more expensive. So he's sort of like taking the video course model and sort of turning it on his head. But he's doing it for a reason, because he wants engagement and change, and not just earning money off of a course that people watch 22% of and then quit, right? So, but I think that space is sort of absorbing a lot of the training stuff. And I think there's still a place for books, but I think maybe it's almost more like Kickstarted books. So if you have someone that you like the work that they're doing and they have an idea for a book and you believe in that person. It's almost like personality based in some ways. Like, do I believe in what Joe can produce related to anything around responsive? Like, you could do responsive design for weasels or something and you might get, backing, right? But I mean, that's of course a silly example, but I think maybe it's moving in that direction where you sort of buy the work that the person does, and then you're just interested in seeing what they might come up with. I know that there's a variety of people, someone like Paul Jarvis, who does a lot of work, and he sort of sells on that concept, right? That he sort of has a certain perspective, and if you like his perspective, you'll probably like most of the things he produces. So it's a challenge, right? I think there's still going to be the big books, right? The ones where you get $250,000, $500,000, $1 million advance, but you might have to research that 2 or 3 years and do this huge proposal, and it's like almost like a business plan,
Right.
And there's expectations around what you're going to deliver. So the bar is higher. Where, like, I think we were in the tech press where the bar was a little bit lower, the budgets were a little bit lower, the advances were lower, and they could take more risks, right? It was almost like investing in startups, small startups, or something like a incubator or something. So I think that if you think of it that way, like those big books you see when you go to the airport, those are like, $500,000 advances, in some cases more, but it's also a huge research process to get accepted, right? So it's another whole completely different animal, completely different game.
Yeah, absolutely. And so to that point, right? You have 2 books out. The video course stuff is interesting. We've talked about that on this show with people like Troy Dean and Sean Hesketh, which I will link in the show notes, along with the study that you mentioned, Mike. So, but you do have a community, right? So I like to ask, do you talk to anybody about business advice or direction or things like that? But maybe you could talk to this community of sketchnoters that have been built up over the last few years.
Well, yeah, I think that's the most exciting thing and probably the proudest thing. Like, by all rights, I should be proud of my books, and of course I am. But I think I'm actually more proud of the community that's been built over time, because I think that's the thing that's going to make sketchnoting go forward. It's people, getting turned on by the idea and applying it in their own lives in unique ways that I could have never imagined. Like, that's really exciting to me to see people like my friend Rob, who's a physicist, using it to capture ideas around his work in physics, right? Like really heavy duty scientific concepts. And he's using it as a way to express ideas. Like, I could have never imagined that in my books, right? That's just not my space. But the concept was general enough that it opened up the doors for people like him and a variety of other people. A lot of teachers are really grabbing onto the idea as a way to help their students who have a tendency to want to doodle anyway. Well, why couldn't we co-opt that concept and actually encourage them to doodle if that's how they think and work? That could help them to really absorb and internalize the concepts that they're trying to teach in their own way. So I have a variety of friends in this community that I rely on. One big person is Mauro Taselli, who basically is the chief operating sketchnoter of the Sketchnote Army. That's just sketchnotearmy.com. And the focus of that site is simply that we promote other people's work, from beginners to more experienced people. It's just an outlet to show what you can do with sketchnotes and to get as wide a variety of people and the work that they do up there, so that if somebody comes to it, they can look through and say, wow, they're using it in business or science or education or travel or all these wide variety of uses. It provides sort of that reference, and I think that's the beauty of the community for me, is just seeing how wide and how deep the concept can be applied. And it's fun. Some of my lifelong friends have been built through this community, so it's definitely benefited me in many ways, and I'm pretty excited about the opportunities that I see ahead for the community as a whole, and all the places where sketchnoting could go that I can't even imagine yet. There might be many other ways it could be applied, so that's pretty exciting.
Yeah, that's awesome. And that was kind of the impetus to your second book, right? So to set this up, there was the Sketchnotes. There was, I'm drawing a blank. Was it just called Sketchnotes?
The
Sketchnote Handbook. That's it. Yeah. And Sketchnote Workbook was the second one. So the handbook introduces the notion, and the workbook kind of shows you all of the many ways that you could apply sketchnotes, right? So, like I said, I sketched a Yankee game, and instead of just like keeping a box score, which is an impossible thing to do, especially if you're watching like a National League game. It's harder, but sketching the game, I still like remember like Pineda pitched and he had like 11 strikeouts because I wrote like an ace.
Mm-hmm.
And that game was years ago. The book came out in 2014, so I did it in probably
2013. Yeah.
2013, right? And so, it's very cool to kind of see you take this concept and apply it to things where you might not even consider doing it because you're not taking notes, right? It's more the sketching something that's happening than just straight up taking notes about something.
Yeah, it's more like capturing the experience in a lot of ways.
Yeah, very cool, very cool. I remember I learned like in an art class I took in high school, the notion of the thumbnail sketch. An artist would see something and then like draw it on their thumbnail so that later they can do like a proper painting or apply it. So that's very cool. So we've talked all about the community and Sketchnotes. So let's talk about how you built it, where it is your books. I'd love to talk about the publishing process going from idea to execution. So maybe you could talk a little bit about that.
Yes, sure. And I would say that I'm probably a little bit unique in some ways in that I came from a print design background. So I had the ability to actually and did many annual reports and other large, long format books from design to production. So I would actually turn files over to printers and go on press checks and make sure the colors are right and all that kind of stuff. So I had that advantage. So going into it, I was offered the opportunity to pretty much do the whole book. So it was a huge control thing, right? Where I think in your case, you probably did screenshots and you wrote and probably got approvals for, screenshots of other people's work and stuff like that. Obviously, you wrote the concepts and worked with an editor and all that kind of stuff. So I had the distinct advantage of being able to do everything from the writing of the concepts all the way to delivering the files. So the way it started was from this the story I told about Vaughn connecting me with the acquisitions editor Nikki McDonald. It then went to a proposal stage. So I wrote an outline of what I thought the book would be. We broke it into chapters, and I gave an overview of each chapter and what it would cover in a relatively good amount of detail. They provided actually a structure for how they wanted things to be received. So that was very helpful to have a template that would show exactly what they wanted to see and how they wanted to see it. And then my acquisitions editor, Nikki, actually reviewed the proposal and gave me advice. And so we kept tuning it until we got it the way she thought she could win that pitch. And then she took it into there's apparently like board meetings typically where a variety of people sit on the board and they make decisions about which books to make an offer for and which ones they're going to decline or whatever, or they maybe push back and say, refine this further. So she took it in and she made a great pitch and they were willing to take it on. Around that same time, I'd become aware of getting sort of a literary agent through my friend Austin Cleon. He had some stuff that he posted about that. So through another person that I'd worked with, Chris Gillibo, I'd done some illustrations for his book, $100 Startup, and he had an agent. So he connected me with this agent. And the agent, I thought the value for me on the agent was partially that he was able to negotiate probably a little bit more money for the advance and some of the details on royalties. But I think the reason I wanted a literary agent and I'm willing to take some of the earnings that I have and give it to him is he provided and continues to provide advice for me in the publishing space, which I am not an expert in, right? Like I knew nothing about publishing things. So having an expert in that space who is a neutral party, not my publisher, that I could ask questions like, what should I expect? Or, what happens if this happens? Or how should I think about this? He could give me sort of the why things work the way they do and some of the details. He could also tell me like, what I'm hearing from other publishing houses that this is a problem, or, I could ask him questions that were outside of what maybe an editor might be willing or able to respond with. So it's sort of like having a third party advisor in some sense, right? So that's the way I looked at it. And he continues to be valuable in that way. So I connected with him. He did some negotiation. We came up with a deal, signed the contract, and then started working, basically taking the outline that we used to sell the book and expanding it one chapter at a time. So I would take each one of those items and then write a very detailed outline for each one to sort of figure out what it was that we were trying to say, and then providing examples like how would we show this, like describing how might we illustrate this thing, what is there a sketch note that I know of that could illustrate this concept, and started to build each chapter that way. And then at some point, it turned into a manuscript where I actually started writing all the text that you see in the book. The editor would go through it and do the modifications and, advise on, lots of grammar, because my grammar wasn't that great in a lot of cases. So I needed the help there. So eventually we would arrive at a final manuscript that everybody approved and liked. Now, in this case, someone like you might then turn that over to the production team, and they would come up with a design and ask for advice, like, okay, you got a screenshot for this, Joe?
Yeah.
Like, if you're showing WordPress, like what shot do we need to put here? You'd have to manage that stuff.
Right.
In my case with this book, because it was so visual and so unusual, and I was in control of that from a design perspective, I actually did thumbnails. You mentioned before thumbnails for paintings. I did thumbnails for the whole book. So I built a template for myself, and then I pencil sketched basically every chapter of the book at a very high level based on the manuscript that we'd created, sketching out what stuff might appear where and that kind of stuff. And oddly enough, when we finished the book, the thumbnail was actually pretty close to what the final book was. I mean, there was obviously modifications and structural changes, but for the most part, it was a pretty good representation of the book. I got that sort of approved by the editorial team, and then we started to go to work in sort of making it happen. So that was a combination of a couple things. We had the manuscript ready, so that was good to go. But I started having to do all the illustration, all the lettering. One of the other tidbits about my book is because I was a print designer, I knew if I had to handwrite the whole book, it would be insane. It would be a nightmare. So I reached out to a friend who knew a type designer, and we partnered up, and he built a typeface for me from my handwriting, a couple of different handwriting styles.
Wow.
And that allowed me to basically lay out the book like I would have any other typeface. So once we got to the point of putting all the illustration and the words together, that was actually my handwriting as a typeface. And the end result of that too was, because we had this product, we actually turned around and we formalized it, we cleaned it up, and now we're selling that as a typeface so that others can use on their own projects. So it turned out to be kind of a nice benefit in the end that we sort of thought maybe we could do, and it turned out to be pretty good. So I would do, illustrations and just lay the whole thing out in black and white, and the editor again would go through it and check everything, and we would sort of get it nailed down in black and white. And then the last couple steps were we did two colors, so it was black and orange and grays and tints of orange. So I would go through after the approval was done and colorize it. And then it was pretty much done. I would turn it over, the final files, over to the production people, and they ran it on the press.
That's awesome. And that is, yeah, like you said, so I'm not sure what your timeline was like. My timeline was a little tighter because they wanted to get it out by the end of the year. They accepted the proposal in May, and they wanted it out by December.
Okay.
So I was essentially doing like a chapter every 2 weeks or every 10 days or something like that. But you're right. I would write a chapter. I would include screenshots. I would send it off to the first editor. They would make edits. They'd send it back to me. I'd make edits. I'd send it off to the technical editor to make sure that it was programmatically correct. And so that was a bit of a whirlwind process for me. And then I essentially, I approved designs of the cover and of the layout and stuff like that, but I wasn't involved in that at all. Essentially, I handed everything over the final manuscript in October. I saw a final PDF, I think, in the middle of November, and it hit shelves in the middle of December.
Yeah, that sounds like, I think if you counted, so I think of it two ways. If you count it from if I include the proposal part of it, it was about a year for each one. And if you can include the approval to the final production that I handed over, that was like 9 months, which is kind of insane. Now, the other twist that we had is Peach Pit on both books wanted to do videos. So we actually turned all the concepts into a video series. And fortunately, I had a friend who does video, Brian Artka. So he worked with me to shoot all the videos, and I had a script writer that helped turn the manuscript into scripts for TV, more or less. Nice. And we shot video. So it was really insane. Two really insane schedules for not only doing a book and all the production, but then doing all the video as well. But I think having the control was really attractive, and now I'm really happy we did it, because I think we made it exactly the way we wanted. And probably the advantage in your case is they probably had somewhat of a template they could rely on, right? So once they had your text, they flow it in, and it doesn't take too long for them to tweak some styles and make it unique, but yet still follow a standard format. So
Yeah. I remember I remember like I had the cover and the cover was out in the wild as like pre-order.
Hmm.
And then I saw another cover that looked almost exactly like mine and I said, "Hey guys, it looks like somebody's ripping off the cover of my book."
Hmm.
And they were like, "Oh yeah, well that's actually just clip art. So you'll probably see that a lot." And I was like, "Oh, okay, cool." I didn't care. It was just like funny. It didn't even dawn on me that they would use like a stock thing.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. So, but nevertheless, we are, man, I can't believe how fast time has gone. We're coming up on time, and there are a couple more questions I want to ask. We've talked about the process essentially from writing it to it hitting the shelves, but maybe we can do like a combined question of what are the big transformations since launch? So maybe you could talk about like the promotion process or things that if you notice like any errors, there are errors in my book. And then what are your plans for the future of Sketchnotes?
Interesting. So PR was as much work as in some ways as the book itself, which you probably could
Mm-hmm.
attest to, right?
Mm-hmm.
Sort of my angle on it was I had sort of over time built up people that I thought would be good candidates to receive samples of the book. My angle was to give away tons of free samples to people I thought could be influencers, people that would be welcoming to the idea, who would be interested in the idea. And if people asked me, I would send them samples. And Peachpit has been great about anybody that I can send a name, address, and an email and a telephone number in some cases, like for international, they would send books to them. So I think that was a huge part in getting traction. I think there was also the benefit of there was sort of a desire to have some direction on how to do this sketchnoting because it was, like you said, becoming more popular at most conferences, and people would see it and think, well, I can't do that. So, but if they were open to it, there was sort of a book that would give them direction on how to get started and to move it forward. So I think PR wise, I did as many podcasts like this as I could. I did interviews, like any kind of opportunities to really sell the idea that included talks. And that I think really helped sort of all this slower ground working on the ground with people, individuals, one at a time, has sort of built up over time, and it's sort of helped build a momentum because I think it's a little bit more organic and natural in a lot of ways. As far as where I think it's going, right now I'm really excited because I have an opportunity to do a lot of teaching, and I think that's really where I wanted to go with this was how can I take these concepts and go in and mainly with teams now. I've done some individual stuff where I invite people to come to a place, and those are often a ton of work, and sometimes you wonder whether the return, the return is great from the impact side, but like the earnings that you make from all the work you have to do to get an event like a workshop to happen is a ton. And I'm doing it on the side as I still have a full-time job, so that's the other kicker. Then there is this isn't my full-time thing, so I'm really excited to have opportunities to go to like places like Drexel University or to How Live in Chicago or different places and teach the concepts to people and to teams. And I think that's the future that I see is just going out and teaching people and really sort of giving them a kickstart where they can now take it and see in a really short time that it's applicable and then use it in their lives.
Nice. That's awesome. And so we are at time. We can go a little bit long though, because this is really interesting to me. Has your, well, so by the time this comes out, I will be completely solo. I, at the time of this recording, do have a full-time job. That's been very good to me about being flexible to do the podcast and the side gig. So what's it like trying to balance your full-time job with kind of your side stuff?
It's a big challenge because in addition to having sketchnoting on the side and the Sketchnote Army and teaching and then a full-time day job, I've got 3 little kids at home and they all want to, go on bike rides and play. And I have my wife that I want to go on dates with and spend time with and, other activities. So it's a challenge, but I think what I've learned is it's important to really balance and focus on the important things. So most of the time I get it pretty good, but there's times when, I miss things or, maybe I just made a choice that turned out it would have been better had I done it this other thing. And you just don't know. You just have to roll with it. But it's a challenge. It really is. I think if, sketchnoting continues to grow and have the momentum that I see, there may become a point in time where I have to make a decision if I want to do it full time. And that's a challenge, right? When you got a family and kids, like to sort of make that jump as a father. Absolutely. And, with mortgages and payments and all the other things that come with having a family, It's a big risk. It's a lot bigger risk than when you're single or something. I mean, not to dismiss those. Those are of course risky too, but it's a different kind of risk. Maybe is a better way to say it. So it's a challenge. It's just a matter of choosing priorities and deciding what I want to do. And I think that having that perspective helps.
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny. I made the decision to go solo with a 3-month-old in the house, and it's so I could spend more time with her. Mm-hmm. On the flip side, I probably would have had the bandwidth to go solo while I was single, but I had the time then. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I didn't have as many expenses or a family to support, but I also had the time to kind of work on my full-time job and my side gig. So it's an interesting balance, and it's definitely a tough decision no matter what you decide to do. And with that, I want to ask the last question before I get to the fast five, which I didn't prep you for, but it's just 5 questions. I like to ask, just give me your gut answer. But the first, or the last official question is, do you have any trade secrets for us?
So I mentioned this at a Sketchnote conference that I was at, and I think a lot of people don't realize this. They really focus on the drawing ability and how beautiful things look in sketchnoting, particularly. But I think the secret weapon in sketchnoting is really listening well. So like, if you hone your listening skills, I think sketchnoting gets a lot easier because you can really clearly determine what stuff's worth keeping and what's not. And that's a really tough question to ask. People ask me, how do you know what's the big idea or what's important and what isn't? Like, well, I sort of can't tell you that because that's a decision that you have to make, right? It's all relative to what you want to get out of something. But I think if you can really focus on listening, if your listening is good, it makes everything a lot easier. And that's sort of my trade secret, is to sort of enter into things I sketchnote by really focusing on listening and sort of analyzing and piecing things together and coming to my own conclusions about what it means, because ultimately that's what I'm going to take away and apply, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And just to add to that point, you definitely don't have to be good at drawing to be a good sketchnoter. I've always enjoyed drawing, but seeing my sketchnotes next to the fellow who did the soccer game, shows that the skill levels can vary, and you can still capture the idea well. So
yeah.
But okay, so let's get to the fast 5.
All right, let's do it.
All right, so what is your favorite book?
I would say my favorite book is still got to be Lord of the Rings series.
Nice, very nice. As a follow-up, what's the last book that you read?
The last book, I just read an interesting book just this week by a guy named Rob Bell, who wrote a book called What is the Bible? And so he comes at the Bible from a contextual perspective. He does a lot of research in scripture from the Hebrew and from the Jewish perspective. So what I like about it was he really looked at the context of who were the people that wrote the Bible. What was it like when they wrote it? Why did they write the things they wrote? And why did these things stick around? Like, what made these things survive over thousands of years when so many other things didn't? So his perspective on looking at scripture was really fascinating for me, and quite enjoyed that one.
Yeah. Wow. That's, man, we could have a whole other show on that. I went to 20 years of Catholic school and we talked all about that. So
interesting.
Very cool. What is your favorite type of music?
Boy, I love a wide variety, but I would say if I had to choose one, I really like 80s music. So like 80s new wave.
Nice. Any band you want to shout out here?
Oh boy, I'm a big New Order fan, so that would be a good choice.
Nice.
I'm really happy now lately that I'm hearing lots of bands are actually sort of trying to capture that 80s new wave alternative sound. So I'm really excited about some of the music that I'm hearing coming back.
Very cool. What is your favorite food?
Oh, my favorite food. Boy, that's a tough one. If I was forced to narrow it down, I would love pad Thai food.
Nice. Oh man, I haven't had Thai food in a while. I'm gonna have to get that now, which I think I say after every answer. Who is your favorite sports team?
Of course, it's the Green Bay Packers.
I think I knew the answer to that one. Yep.
Excited about that this year. Lots of young guys coming in. Got a good quarterback. So you gotta love your team wherever you're from. I respect that.
Absolutely. I myself am born and raised New Yorker, so I'm a Giants fan. But I've as long as the Packers weren't playing the Giants, I would root for the Packers. They're just a good team. They're like a good group of guys, it seems like. So
yeah, Big Blue, good old Big Blue.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and then the last question, I'll pose it to you the same way that it was posed to me, which was, if you couldn't do computer work, what would you do? So if you couldn't do the thing that you do as a day job, what would you do professionally?
But I think I would go into sketchnoting, and that would not necessarily include computers. It would be lots of whiteboarding and paper, and maybe it would be iPads, but it would be more drawing focused. And teaching, I think teaching would be really fascinating. To take complex ideas and simplify them and help people to see them in a new way. I think that's really exciting to see people really like glomming onto an idea and really taking it to the next step for them. It's a huge talent that I would love to build on.
Awesome. Yeah, that sounds fantastic. I think I said on one show that I would be an animator, and the guest pointed out that I think animators still need to use computers. So I would definitely focus in more on the drawing and the art part of it, though.
Yeah.
Cool. Very cool. Well, Mike, thank you so much for joining me today. It was we went a little long, but it was a great conversation, so I'm happy to do that.
Well, thanks for making time. This is a lot of fun to sort of step into a different space and share, and hopefully the stuff we've talked about is helpful to some people out there. And definitely if you want to reach out and say hello, I can answer questions in addition that you may have had from the podcast.
Awesome. Well, Mike, thank you so much for joining me. What a great conversation. I loved talking to him about Sketchnotes in general and publishing through our publisher. It's something that we have in common, and again, just a fantastic conversation. Definitely check the show notes for all of Mike's contact information and the links that we talked about. And if you liked the show, then definitely head over to Apple Podcasts and leave us a rating and a review. It's how people find us, and honestly, it's a great way for me to get feedback from the listeners on things that work, things that don't work. And you know what? If you leave a review, maybe I'll read it on the air. So again, thank you so much for listening. Thanks to our sponsors, Liquid Web and Seriously Simple Podcasting. And until next time, get out there and build something.